Welcome to another edition of Fronteras, A Changing America. On our last edition, we had an interesting discussion about the debt ceiling. We actually had one of our guests joining us all the way from Washington, D.C., Vincent Perez, Communications Director of Congressman Silvestre Reyes, joining us from D.C. Then he's with us now here in studio, along with a great group of guests from all over the Congressman's office. Why? Well, folks, we've just concluded a very interesting border security conference that took place in our own community. We're going to be talking about that, and we have a special political roundtable for all of you this evening to begin to discuss the future of our community. We talked about young people. Well, we have a lot of young faces on studio. Joining us today, back for a second time, Vincent Perez, Communications Director of Congressman Silvestre Reyes. Also joining him, we have the Press Secretary to the Congressman's office, Claudia Ordaz, and we have the Special Projects Coordinator for Congressman Silvestre Reyes, Sigrid Gonzalez. Guys, thanks for joining us. How was the conference? Tell me all about it. I heard it was a pretty neat event. We had a bunch of interesting people come by. How was it?
It was a great success. It's the 8th year it is that we've done it. It's a conference that Congressman Reyes helped found with Dr. Natalicio out at UTEP. It's something that, he was a former Border Patrol agent, and so he just feels it's important it is that we here on the border should be leading the discussion on border issues, on border policy. And so each year we bring great guests, and this year we had another great lineup. It was a great success.
Who was on the lineup?
Well, we had four panels in total. We started out with panel 1 with resilient communities, panel 2 focusing on trade, panel 3 focusing on the U.S.-Mexico cooperation, and panel 4 focusing on innovation technology. Our keynote speakers this year, it was Ambassador Ron Kirk. He's a U.S. Trade Representative. He opened up the conference.
Big Texas history there.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was mayor of Dallas.
Yeah.
And opening up the second day, it was Commissioner Burson, and we all know him in the community. Sure. He's well respected. And our luncheon speaker was great. He is the National Security Advisor to President Calderon, Alejandro Poire. So he came down all the way from Mexico to speak on the conference, and he was great. I think everybody really liked his remarks.
You know, it's interesting to me. We have a border security conference of this magnitude in our own community. We have all these different individuals coming in. I was watching Charlie Rose the other night, and when we were watching Charlie Rose, he begins to have a conversation about what Mexico is currently living through, talking about border security. Big question that really wasn't able to be answered is, what does the future look like? I mean, was this a discussion that was talked about in your conference, and was that question even able to be answered? What does the future look like?
Well, you know, our first panel was building resilient communities, and it was strictly based on talking about what it is for Mexico's future. And so we have a lot of agreement that we need to invest in our youth, and there's a lot of prevention programs as far as, you know, teaching them critical skills for job skills, you know, for their future, and trying to move them away from getting involved with drug cartels. So investing our resources, programs into our youth, I think, is what's important for Juarez and for the United States as well.
And how does the United States get involved with working with youth in Ciudad Juarez? I mean, or are we talking about youth in the United States side of the border? What was that conversation like?
Well, there's a variety of ways. I mean, there's a Merida initiative that does have a component for investing in social programs that invest in different nonprofit organizations in Mexico. We also give Mexico aid through USAID, which also provides assistance to Mexico as well. And this year we actually had Paul Teeple, who was one of the program directors of Aganar. It's actually the program that President Clinton and Carlos Slim are working on together to invest in Juarez youth. It's a soccer program that teaches them leadership skills through sport to encourage them to get jobs and try to get these youth away from the drug cartels and the drug trade that is a very lucrative environment over there.
So we're talking a lot about youth. You guys are saying, okay, youth is part of the key. I'm sitting with a youthful roundtable involved in politics. How did you guys get involved, first of all, in politics, in a nutshell? What made you want to be involved? We'll begin with Sigrid.
Well, to tell you the truth, I first got into the Congressman's office just through an internship. Yeah. I started working with HHS in an internship, just getting my feet in Washington and just seeing everything around me, how a lot of it in Washington just revolves around politics. And it was just fascinating, loved it. And, you know, growing up in Juarez and El Paso, this was something that I really never had experience. So I went through the HAKU program, and I started, there was a week that we were lobbying for higher Hispanic education.
Yeah.
Went into, you know, the Capitol, had heard so many great things about the congressman, wanted to meet him. Went in there, I met with then, he was our education LA, Vince, and we, you know, talked about education, about Hispanic community and everything. And it was great. I was just like, wow, there's another El Paso in Washington? That's, you know, fabulous. So, so from there, you know, I got into, there was an opening, got in there, and there was a job opening, started with the congressman.
Coordinator of the entire
and
border
she put this
security.
whole thing on.
She put the whole thing on. That's from what I hear.
Her work.
No,
See,
but it's
that's an
great
interesting
working.
story to me, because if, you know, I want to get more of these stories out there, because a lot of people think, well, you know, what are the key components that we need to spark this kind of interest in students? You're putting them out right there. I mean, you went out, you kind of fell in love with Washington, D.C., and you began to have these experiences through HAKU and the like. And it's interesting, because that's a lot of talk about what we should begin to do in the future, especially if we want to get students outside of this culture of, I guess, the drug culture of our community. And it's unfortunate to have to say that, but there is a drug culture in our community, not necessarily of high use per se, but the culture is very prevalent in terms of trafficking in the area. Claudia, how did you begin with
Well, it's kind of relating, you know, I can relate, you know, to the problems that are going on in Juarez as far as, you know, the pressures that they're seeing. You know, but it's nearly not as big as theirs, of course.
Yeah.
But growing up in El Paso, you have a different perspective of Hispanics. You live on a border city.
Right.
So I fell in love with El Paso. I love my community, but I saw a lot of issues. And the one I fell in love with was domestic violence against women. So I saw it within our culture, and I wanted to find a way to end that cycle of violence. And I didn't know how, but when I started college, I met two wonderful mentors of mine, Dr. Stout and Dr. Coronado.
University of Texas El Paso?
Exactly. Sure. So we started talking about this nonprofit organization through the Center for Civic Engagement at UTEP under the direction of Dr. Stout, and it was called Ni Una Más in English, Not Another Death, dealing with a femicide that was occurring in Juarez at the time. So, well, still going on. And so we just wanted to kind of educate students, young folks around the El Paso community, on the preventions, the risks of domestic violence, and kind of relating it back to the femicide. So we just started with that, and then I got involved with politics, was president of University Democrats, had fun with that, headed to Austin and started politics there, and then now I'm here. So.
Now you're here, press secretary of Congressman Reyes.
Yeah.
Vince, now you and I go back a little ways. We went to college together, but what was your spark? What was the spark that got you involved? I mean, now you're communications director for the Congressman.
You know, actually, when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to be part of the Community Scholars Public Policy Research Internship, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of problems that we have in El Paso.
Yeah.
Back then, you know, there were a lot of kids who would graduate from high school, go off to college somewhere else, and never come back.
Yeah.
But working in Community Scholars really gave me the opportunity to learn about the issues that impact El Paso in a negative way that other communities don't necessarily have to deal with, such as Austin and San Antonio and all these great Texas cities. So I think now you're starting to see a movement of young people coming back to El Paso. So that really kind of sparked my interest in public policy. Went over to Georgetown, had a great experience there. But I wanted to come back home, and after Georgetown, I came back to El Paso, but I couldn't find a job. And I just called the congressman's office one day and said, hey, I'm from El Paso and looking for a job. If you have something, I'd be interested in. And luckily enough, they had an opening.
It's amazingly interesting to me how much youth there is in the congressman's office. I mean, it seems to be run by a great group of people. If we had the entire office here, I think you'd see a lot of familiar faces, yourselves and your generation, because it's a youthful office. Here's the question that I think will be the difficult one, or one of the difficult ones of the evening. Is your experience the exception or the norm for El Paso youth?
Surprisingly, to tell you the truth, in Washington, when we obviously go to all these events, you know, especially Hispanic events that we try to reach out, you know, meet other Hispanics within the community in Washington, which is really hard to find Hispanics.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people from El Paso in Washington, a lot. And that is really surprising. I mean, you know, we know what a small town this is. And it's great. Every time we meet a face and they're like, you're from El Paso? And, you know, we always make that connection.
There's a lot of expatriates out there.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's really nice to see, you know, a lot of people working on policy, immigration. A lot of people pushing immigration, you know, different think tanks, and, you know, there in Washington coming from El Paso. It's great. It's really great.
Anybody think that you're the exception, not the norm, or is this the norm experience for most youth in El Paso?
I would say it's not the norm. I mean, unfortunately, you know, in speaking to a lot of kids are actually fascinated. They're like, wow, you work in Washington. I don't think a lot of people get the opportunity to go and move away from El Paso.
See, and I agree with that. And if we can have a debate, we can have a debate.
No,
but
it's a lot of it. It's culture. I mean, you know, how many parents let their daughters, their sons, you know, just leave El Paso? It's a lot of their culture, and it's not bad. It's absolutely not. There's nothing bad with that.
Remnants of the machista culture, is that what
No,
we're
it's not
to?
machista. It's, you know, family. It's family oriented.
Yeah. Well, you know, I came from a similar family with a lot of strong Latino Hispano values, and it was a big challenge to go out away from home and the like. The reason I asked the question, guys, is not to put you in evidence or to put you on the spot. It's just, this is one of the biggest questions facing our community. Here we have a community that's rising as one of the Latino Hispano capitals of America. You have the fastest growing demographic of Latinos and Hispanos, you know, bar none. Any other segment of the population in the United States, it's Latinos and Hispanos. And here's El Paso as one community that has been experiencing that for years. And if the consensus around the table is that it's not really the norm, it's the exception, experiences that everyone around this table has been able to have. The question then becomes, well, how do we develop more of these? And I'm wondering if when we were talking about education in the Border Security Conference, is that what it revolved around? Or how do we make more of these experiences possible? I mean, as far as I know, Vince, Community Scholars still works with a small amount of students. Budgets at school districts are getting smaller and smaller. How do we build more of these opportunities for students? And I ask you guys, not thinking that you may have all the answers, but hopefully with the brain power on the table.
No pressure. Well, honestly, I think it's just a lot of, you know, we all have circles of friends, and there's wonderful organizations around El Paso, you know, building around, you know, young leaders, and I think there's a growth in that happening in El Paso. So you're introducing each other to different, whether it's politics, whether it's business, whether it's marketing, whether it's nursing, or whatever it may be. It's kind of just word of mouth and building those networks and relationships and talking about, you know, this is, you know, what you can do next is something that you can do. I can introduce you to so-and-so. I think it just starts there, but I don't know, really.
It's tough.
I think it all starts with education. I mean, clearly you have to give kids the foundation, and you know, that's how it is. They're going to get the opportunities in life to go off to a good college, or they're going to be prepared for college and prepare themselves for a good career. I think you're right now with shrinking budgets. I mean, we're losing a lot of, not only are we losing teachers in the classroom, but we're losing a lot of extracurricular activities that really inspire kids to find interests outside of the classroom. And that's really, I think, what's disturbing. There was actually a story that came out today that China leads the world in developing students who are academically prepared for math. I think 75% of their students in Shanghai have met the average standard for math. In the United States, I think we're 34th. We're lowest among industrialized nations. And it's only going to get worse if we don't.
And in El Paso, I'm sure
it is.
We're
behind. And Texas certainly lags the rest of the nation when it comes to education. We have very low SAT scores. I mean, in addition to that, I mean, we want to talk about outside education. We have the highest number of children and adults without health care, which also affects the family environment in which these children grow up in. So I think it's very scary, since we're not seeing those same investments right now in education being made. And this article said exactly that. It's going to have implications for our future workforce. Yeah.
I mean, and here's a concern for me, and I remember I've had this discussion back on the radio show. We had a discussion about the lures that our youth are facing today. And we're talking border security. You guys had that one panel. You know, one of the lures right now is you can make a quick buck and a pretty big buck working with any of the major cartels that are trafficking through the area to just bring product across that border. That's a very quick way of making a quick dollar. And if you ask what are the other opportunities in El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, Las Cruces to make a high amount of dollars, to be able to go off and make it big, quote unquote, make it in the real world, as a lot of young people talk about, like in Silicon Valley, like at a Google or at a Facebook, at that kind of level. Do we have that kind of capacity or capability here in El Paso? And if so, has that even been part of the discussion? I mean, I'm very curious about the youth portion of the discussion at the security conference.
Well, yes, we always have to see that there's, yes, we are sister cities, El Paso and Juarez, but they're two different communities, education-wise and everything. Right now, resilient communities, we were touching upon only dealing with Juarez youth. That's a lot of the funding that's going, targeting those neighborhoods that need help, getting children off the streets and putting them back into the schools, A Ganar program, training them the skills that they need for their jobs, for the workforce. And now, looking in the U.S. side community, a lot of it again comes with immigration. Getting, what about all those children all those students that graduate, with engineering? Like President Obama said, that why can't they go to work with Google? Why can't they go, work with these big organizations just because, they don't have the right documentation? They're, that's very unfair.
And another goal of the conference, I mean, part of the great thing about having this at UTEP is that we're trying to increase UTEP's capacity for research. They're on their way to a Tier 1 university status. We're trying to get additional research dollars. And interestingly, UTEP is really starting to become a national leader on border issues and national security. And really, UTEP is strategically located, it's strategically situated to benefit from these industries. It's right in the middle of the border, and on top of that, we neighbor one of the largest military bases in the country. And there's already right now at UTEP not only the Center for Border Studies, they also have a Center for Intelligence Studies as well, where students can go to UTEP and actually prepare for careers in national defense and security fields. So these are the types of industries, and this is part of the goal of having the conference because it raises UTEP's profile that we bring national speakers here to El Paso. And students today have the benefit of not only listening to these speakers, but they also have the benefit of studying in these very critical fields that are going to be always important for our nation's future.
One of the things that always comes up at conferences is people come together from all over. Big names come to town. And a lot of ideas are thrown out. But then putting them to action is something else. I mean, here locally, the kinds of ideas that have been surging from local advocates like City Councilman Beto O'Rourke, who is rumored to be wanting to run for Congress, the position that, of course, Congressman Silvestre Reyes currently has. He proposes legalization of marijuana for, to be able to somehow curb the violence. The ideas, have any concrete ideas come out of the Border Security Conference? And what kind of ideas have they been like?
Well, we recently in this conference, we had Alejandro Puare, who we mentioned. He's this National Security Advisor to President Calderon. And that was actually one of the questions that was raised during his Q&A session, and his remarks, is legalization the answer? And he said, absolutely not, You can legalize, is that gonna solve? No, because now cartels are focusing now in kidnappings, in extortions. So legalizing
everything else.
Exactly. Yeah. So legalizing, marijuana, how is that going to help Mexico? How is that going to help the United States? It's not. It's just, just going to push the problem a lot to another side. So
it's investing in, their government. And he's touched on that, on that point that you need to fix from the bottom up, and it's not starting with marijuana because there's been so many discussions. It's not just marijuana. There's kidnapping, like Sigrid said. There's cash. It's just about control. So it kind of steers away from the real problem, and the real problem comes within the governments. And he touched on that. You need to fix the governments with local, state, and federal before you can fix the problem.
Yeah, he said this goes way beyond legalization of drugs, of any drug. This goes, beyond that.
So if it's not legalization of drugs, then what is it? What are the solutions or the concrete proposals on the table?
Sure. Well, see, the problem is that, again, as was mentioned, Mexico's drug cartels are not just drug cartels. They are organized criminal organizations that have diversified their profitable enterprises. What I tell people is, imagine if you woke up one day and you knew that the police couldn't do anything to you. You knew that the police were ineffective. What would you do? Imagine all of the criminal activities it is that are available to the drug cartels to profit off of. Recently there was a big warehouse that was discovered where they were able to manufacture large amounts of pirated DVDs. They had the capability to produce 500,000 copies of Kung Fu Panda a day. And this is something that the drug cartels are profiting from. Now, what is the solution? That's often asked. Clearly, Mexico lacks the capacity to arrest and prosecute effectively these criminal organizations. And that's something that we really have to work on. If you legalize drugs and Mexico doesn't have the capacity to enforce a new regime where drugs are legalized and marijuana is legal, I mean, drug cartels are still going to profit off of the legal sale of drugs. Yeah. So we need to what the solution is that right now, what you have to get more effective of, helping Mexico's government increase their institutional capacity to arrest criminals, but then also to prosecute them effectively and to detain them and to enforce the rule of law. That's really where Mexico needs help in, and that's what was mentioned during the conference.
Now, on the American side of the border, are things being talked about what to implement on the El Paso side of the border? I know a lot of people are fearful about perhaps spillage and things like that. I mean, these are some of the conversations that have come out. Any things being talked about implementing on the American side of the border, or is it all strictly Mexico?
Well, I wouldn't say, there's this, when you're looking at the outside in, like if you're, if you're in like Cleveland or somewhere else in California or somewhere else, when you get this perception of El Paso and it's just so dangerous and it's a horrible place to be, that irritates a lot of El Pasoans. I know it irritates me. So it's just, we understand there's a problem, and it's all about education. We can't be a part of the problem. So, getting away from that, supporting, our neighbors, supporting our family, I think that's just the solution here on the United States end.
Well, in DCP, the drug control, what are they, the drug control?
White House, the drug control.
Yeah, the drug control segment of it. They really touch upon, the problem is a lot here in the United States with the consumption of drugs. We need to stop that. We need to do that outreach from the very beginning when they're small to say drugs are bad. Yeah. Putting out, TV ads and everything, because essentially we're giving power to the cartels by consuming these drugs here in the United States. So that's...
So we talk about proposals, and there's just so many, a wide array of proposals. Some of them are clear, some of them are not clear. A lot of people, there's a lot of frustration around the issue of border security. When are we going to get to a place where we can go across the border again? We were talking about that before the show began. We could go across the border again and be able to enjoy that. President Obama came out and said, that the flow of goods and services in El Paso is and along the border is great, as good as it has ever been. One of the things that caught my attention, though, is, well, maybe the flow of goods and services, I would have to look into those numbers, but certainly not the flow of people. I mean, we don't go to Ciudad Juarez anymore. They come a lot to the United States. In fact, a lot of their businesses are coming. There's a lot of frustration in the community that ideas are out there, but nothing is being done concretely. How does the congressman and the staff respond to questions like those?
Well, I guess there's 2 points. One, we have to look at what's inside our sphere of control. Obviously on the domestic side, and this is something that we emphasized at the Border Security Conference, a lot of people are not only afraid to cross into Mexico, a lot of people in the United States right now are afraid to come to El Paso because there's this image out there that cities on our side of the border are very dangerous. And certainly the violence in Mexico has had a negative impact, not just on our image, but also, economically, it's been very difficult for us to attract tourism when people are very afraid. And as we mentioned during the conference, our side of the border and everything that's been invested on the federal side has really had an impact in improving security on our side of the border. That's really what's mainly within Congress's jurisdiction and what we can do most about. El Paso, once again, is the safest city in the nation. Not only is it El Paso, but the 6 largest cities on the U.S.-Mexico border are the safest in the nation. I have been as bold as to say is that the border region is the safest region of the United States. That's also a message that we need to get out there.
It's a message that we need to get out there, but that somehow is not getting out there. And that's the frustrating part. We talk about education, we talk about needing to build more experiences for students. However, particularly on the education side of things, to bring El Paso to the next level, both on this topic and on other topics. The question is how to bring that to fruition. And I just kind of like to get a quick vision from you guys as to what you would like El Paso to look like. If you had the opportunity to really be able to build the image for the city, what would that image be? I mean, obviously, you've had the opportunity to represent our community in Washington. You've lived in different cities. What is that in a nutshell? Your vision on an individual basis.
Our vision for El Paso. I mean, you know, El Paso.
That's a hard one.
It is in a way, but at the same time, we have the people. We have the friendliest people here. We have the safest people. We have so much culture, so much. I don't know. It's just a great town that I really wish people would, you know, have that other image rather than how media portrays it.
Investing in El Paso. We have, like Sigrid was saying, she knows how many people from El Paso. I can go practically anywhere and find somebody from El Paso. It's just finding those folks, bringing them back here, and investing in our own community. Bring it here, you know, and having a vibrant downtown is something UTEP having, you know, through the American Recovery Investment Act, and that alone, you know, we brought an adequate amount of funds here, and that's investing within our community, and it's just keeping those folks here, jobs and so on and so forth.
Vince, last few seconds.
You know, I think it's not just about bringing El Pasoans back, but how do we bring other people from the country to El Paso? You know, things about San Antonio and Austin is that's where other people want to live. It'd be nice if we can get to a point where people would say, you know what, El Paso is the kind of place that I would like to relocate to.
And it can happen. It will.
Folks, it's an interesting discussion today that we've certainly engaged in. A Changing America, hard questions, not very easy to answer, but certainly the basis of future discussions. We hope you continue to tune in to Fronteras, A Changing America every Thursday. I'm Hector H. Lopez. We'll see you next time.